The neon lights of Las Vegas flickered like a heartbeat, but I woke up to silence, the kind that claws at your chest. My hotel room smelled of stale coffee and regret, the remnants of a night I couldn't piece together. Then I saw her name on my phone screen, Clara, and the world tilted, dragging me back to a love I thought I'd buried 3 years ago. I'm Riley, 28, a photographer who chases fleeting moments through a lens but never quite captures her own. Las Vegas was supposed to be a quick gig. Snap some shots for a travel magazine, drown my loneliness in the city's chaos, and leave. But last night's blur of slot machines and whiskey had left me disoriented, sprawled across a king-sized bed in a room I didn't remember checking into. My phone buzzed again, Clara's name glowing like a warning. I hadn't seen her since Chicago, since the fight that tore us apart, since I walked away from the only person who ever made me feel whole. I sat up, head pounding, and opened the text. Meet me at the Mirage. 7 p.m. Please, Riley. No explanation, no context, just her words, sharp and alive, cutting through the haze. Why was she here? Why now? I tossed the phone onto the bed, my heart racing like I'd just sprinted down the strip. Clara was my past, my what if, my almost forever. 3 years ago, I'd left her because I was scared of how much I loved her, scared of how much it hurt to be seen so completely. Now, she was in Vegas and I was unraveling. I stumbled to the window, the city sprawling below like a fever dream. The Mirage wasn't far, its golden glow a beacon in the distance. I could ignore her, catch my flight tomorrow, and keep running. But the thought of her standing there, waiting, made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt since I last held her. I grabbed my camera, my constant companion, and headed out, the desert heat hitting me like a slap as I stepped onto the strip. The Mirage was alive with tourists, slot machines chiming, and the faint scent of chlorine from the pool. I scanned the crowd, my pulse a drumbeat. Then I saw her, Clara, 30, standing by the atrium's waterfall, her black hair cascading over a cream blouse, her green eyes catching the light like sea glass. She looked older, sharper, but still her. The woman who'd once traced constellations on my skin and whispered promises we couldn't keep. She saw me, and her smile was a fragile thing, like it might break if I got too close. Riley, she said, her voice soft but steady, like she'd rehearsed it. You came. I wanted to say something clever, something to hide the way my hands shook, but all I managed was, you're here.
Brilliant, Riley.
Real smooth. She stepped closer, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine, same as always. I didn't think you'd show, she said, her eyes searching mine. But I had to try. Why now? I asked, my voice rougher than I meant. After all this time? Her gaze dropped, and for a moment, she looked like the Clara I'd known, vulnerable, unguarded. Because I'm getting married, she said, and the words hit like a punch. And I can't do it without knowing if there's still something here. I froze, the world narrowing to her face, her words. Married. Clara, my Clara, was someone else's now. Or almost. The atrium's waterfall roared behind us, drowning out the casino's noise, but it couldn't drown out the storm in my chest. I wanted to run, to scream, to pull her close and beg her to stay. Instead, I said, let's walk. We moved through the crowd, the city's pulse syncing with mine. Clara told me she'd moved to Vegas a year ago, chasing a job as a graphic designer. She'd met someone, a woman named Elise, kind and steady, the opposite of me. I listened, my camera strap digging into my shoulder, grounding me as her words tore me apart. She didn't love Elise the way she'd loved me, she said, but Elise was safe, reliable. I was the wildfire she'd survived, and now she was standing at the edge of it again, unsure if she wanted to burn. We ended up at a quiet cafe off the strip, the kind with chipped mugs and flickering neon signs. Over coffee, she told me about the wedding, set for next month at a chapel downtown. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, twisting a napkin into knots. I wanted to reach across the table, to unravel her the way I used to, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Riley, she said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto mine. I need to know if I'm making a mistake. If we're a mistake. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing against my ribs. I'd spent 3 years running from her, from us, but here she was, asking me to face it. I didn't have an answer. Not yet, but the way her hand brushed mine as she reached for her coffee told me we weren't done. Not by a long shot. The cafe's neon sign buzzed above us, casting a pink glow across Clara's face. I wanted to photograph her right then, to freeze this moment before it slipped away again. But my camera stayed in my lap, useless against the pull of her gaze. Why didn't you call sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question had been clawing at me since I saw her text. 3 years of silence, and now this, a wedding, a confession, a chance I wasn't sure I deserved. Clara leaned back, her fingers still tangled in that damn napkin. I tried, she said. After you left Chicago, I called, texted, even wrote you a letter I never sent. You were gone, Riley. Not just physically gone. She wasn't wrong. I'd ghosted her, cut her out like a bad frame in a roll of film. I'd told myself it was for her own good, that I was too broken to love her right. But sitting here, watching her eyes flicker with hurt, I knew I'd been a coward. I was scared. I admit it, the words tasting like ash. You saw me, really saw me, and I couldn't handle it. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers grazing mine. The touch was electric, a spark that lit up every memory I'd tried to bury. Late nights in her Chicago apartment, her laughter as we danced to old jazz records, the way she'd curl into me like I was her safe place. I'm still scared, she said, her voice trembling. But I can't walk into that chapel without knowing if I'm running from you all over again. I wanted to tell her to call it off, to choose me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, what do you want, Clara? Really? She looked away, her eyes tracing the cafe's cracked linoleum floor. I want to feel alive again, she said. Like I did with you. The air between us thickened, heavy with everything unsaid. I paid for the coffee, and we stepped back into the Vegas night, the city's chaos wrapping around us like a second skin. We walked without direction, passing street performers and drunken tourists, until we reached a quiet park near Fremont Street. The lights were softer here, the stars barely visible above the city's glow. Remember that night in Chicago? Clara asked, stopping by a fountain. When we snuck into that rooftop bar and watched the city light up? I nodded, the memory sharp and vivid. We'd been 25 and reckless, stealing kisses between sips of cheap wine, the skyline glittering like it belonged to us. You said we'd conquer the world together, I said, a smile tugging at my lips. I meant it, she said, her voice breaking. I still do. I stepped closer, close enough to see the freckles on her nose, the ones I used to trace with my fingertip. Clara, Don't, she interrupted, her hand on my chest. Not yet. I need time.
Time.
The one thing we'd never had enough of. I nodded, stepping back, giving her the space she asked for, but didn't want. We sat on a bench, the fountain's soft hum filling the silence. She told me about Elise, how they'd met at an art gallery, how Elise's quiet strength had pulled her through a dark year. I listened, each word a reminder that Clara had built a life without me. But the way her knee brushed mine, the way her eyes lingered, told me that life wasn't enough. Let's do something tomorrow, she said suddenly. Something us. I raised an eyebrow. Like old times? Like new times, she corrected, a spark in her eyes. Meet me at the Bellagio fountains. Noon. I agreed, my heart pounding with something dangerously close to hope. As we parted ways, her silhouette fading into the neon haze, I realized I was already falling back into her orbit. The city pulsed around me, but all I could feel was the ghost of her touch, the weight of a second chance I wasn't sure I could take. The Bellagio fountains danced at noon, their jets of water catching the sunlight like liquid diamonds. I stood by the railing, my camera slung over my shoulder, scanning the crowd for Clara. My stomach churned with nerves, like I was 25 again, waiting for her outside that Chicago diner where we had our first date. She appeared like a vision, her black hair loose, a red sundress hugging her frame. She looked like summer, like freedom, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "You're early," she said, a teasing smile softening the tension in her eyes. "Couldn't risk missing you," I replied, and her smile widened, real and unguarded. We stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the fountains sway to a Sinatra song. The music wrapped around us, and for a moment, it was just us. No wedding, no past, no fear. I stole a glance at her, the way her lips parted as she watched the water, and I wondered how I'd ever walked away from this. "Want to get out of here?" she asked, turning to me. "Somewhere Las Vegas?" I nodded, and we ended up at Red Rock Canyon, a short drive from the Strip. The desert stretched out, raw and endless, the red cliffs stark against the blue sky. We hiked a trail, the crunch of gravel under our boots the only sound for miles. Clara's laughter echoed when I tripped over a rock, and I caught her hand to steady myself, our fingers lingering longer than necessary. "Still clumsy," she teased, but her eyes were soft, searching. "Only around you," I shot back, and she laughed again, the sound pulling me back to every good moment we'd ever had. We found a flat rock to rest on, the sun warm on our skin. Clara pulled out a sketchbook, her fingers moving swiftly over the page, capturing the canyon's jagged lines. I watched, mesmerized, as she brought the landscape to life. She'd always been an artist, her drawings a window into her soul. "Show me," I said, leaning closer. She hesitated, then turned the sketchbook toward me. It wasn't just the canyon. There was a figure in the foreground, unmistakably me, my silhouette framed by the cliffs. "You're still my muse," she said quietly, and my heart stuttered. I wanted to kiss her, to close the distance between us, but her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She glanced at it, her face tightening. "Elise," she said, slipping the phone back into her pocket. "She's wondering where I am." The name was a cold splash of reality. I looked away, focusing on the horizon. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm with an old friend," she said, her voice heavy. "It's not a lie, but it's not the truth either." I nodded, the weight of her words settling between us. We hiked back in silence, the desert's vastness mirroring the gap I didn't know how to bridge. Back in the car, Clara turned to me, her eyes fierce. "I don't want to lose you again, Riley. But I don't know how to do this." "Then let's figure it out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "One step at a time." She nodded, and we drove back to the city, the Strip's lights blazing like a challenge. That night, I lay in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling, Clara's sketch burned into my mind. I was her muse, but was I her future? The question kept me awake, the city's hum a restless echo of my own heart. The next morning, I woke to a text from Clara. "Meet me at the High Roller. 6 p.m. Bring your camera." The observation wheel loomed over the Strip, a giant circle of glass and steel, promising a view of the city, and maybe of us. I spent the day restless, my thoughts tangled in her words, her touch, her confession about Elise. At the High Roller, Clara was waiting, her green eyes catching the sunset's glow. She wore a black jacket over her dress, her hair pulled back, looking like she'd stepped out of one of my dreams. "Ready for a ride?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes heavy with something unspoken. We stepped into a cabin, the city unfolding below as we rose. I lifted my camera, capturing the Strip's neon veins, but my lens kept drifting to her, her profile against the glass, the way her fingers traced the railing. Stop that, she said, laughing, but she didn't mean it. You're too good a subject, I said, snapping another shot. She rolled her eyes but posed, one hand on her hip, a playful smirk breaking through. For a moment, we were us again, Riley and Clara, unstoppable, untouchable. As the wheel reached its peak, the city a glittering sea below, Clara's smile faded. I told Elise about you, she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the wheel. Not everything, but enough. My stomach dropped. What did she say? She trusts me, Clara said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But she doesn't know how much you still mean to me. The air felt thinner, the cabin too small. I lowered my camera, my hand shaking. And how much is that? She turned to me, her expression raw. Enough to make me question everything. I stepped closer, the space between us electric. Clara, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she'd close the distance. But she stepped back, her hands gripping the railing. I can't just throw away what I have with Elise, she said. She's good to me, Riley. She's safe. Safe isn't love, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Safe doesn't make your heart race or your hands shake. Safe doesn't keep you up at night, wondering what could have been. She looked at me, tears glinting in her eyes. And you think this does? This chaos? I think we're worth it, I said, my voice breaking. I think we always were. The wheel began its descent, the city rushing back to meet us. Clara wiped her eyes, her silence louder than the strip below. When we stepped out, she grabbed my hand, her grip tight. Come with me tomorrow, she said. There's a place I want to show you. I nodded, my heart a mess of hope and fear. She didn't let go of my hand until we reached the street, and even then, her warmth lingered. That night, I developed the photos from the high roller, her face staring back at me from my laptop screen. She was beautiful, haunted, and mine, at least for now. But as I stared at her image, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that Elise was waiting in the wings, ready to claim the future I wanted for myself. Clara's place was a small art studio downtown, tucked between a tattoo parlor and a dive bar. She led me inside, the walls lined with her paintings, bold, vibrant, full of the life she poured into everything. This is my sanctuary, she said, her voice soft but proud. The studio smelled of paint and coffee, canvases stacked against every surface. She showed me her latest work, a series of desert landscapes that felt alive, pulsing with emotion. I saw myself in them, my silhouette, my eyes, my restlessness. You're everywhere in here, she said, her voice catching. Even when I tried to forget you. I wanted to pull her close, to kiss her until the world made sense again, but I held back. Instead, I picked up a brush, dipping it in blue paint, and added a streak to a blank canvas. Your turn, I said, handing it to her. She laughed, a sound that lit up the room, and we painted together, our strokes messy but honest. For an hour, we were kids again, creating something new, something ours. But as the light faded, so did the ease between us. She set down her brush, her face serious. Elise wants to meet you, she said. I froze, the paintbrush still in my hand. Why? She knows you're important to me, Clara said. She wants to understand.
I didn't want to be understood.
I wanted to be chosen. But I nodded, because what else could I do? We agreed to meet at a restaurant that night, a neutral ground where I'd face the woman who had Clara's present while I clung to her past. The restaurant was upscale, all dim lights and clinking glasses. Elise was there, 32, with short blonde hair and a calm confidence that made me feel like an intruder. She was kind, too kind, shaking my hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Clara sat between us, her tension a living thing. Dinner was torture. Elise talked about her job as a lawyer, her plans for the wedding, her love for Clara. I nodded, my food untouched, Every word a reminder that Clara had a life I wasn't part of. But then Clara's hand found mine under the table, a fleeting touch that said more than words could. After dessert, Elise excused herself to take a call, leaving us alone. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "This was a bad idea." "No," I said, my voice low. "It's real. It's us facing it." She looked at me, her eyes full of everything we'd lost and everything we still had. "I don't know how to choose," she said. "I don't even know if I can." "Then don't," I said, reckless. "Run away with me. Tonight." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she'd say yes. But Elise returned, and the moment shattered. We said goodnight, and I walked back to my hotel alone, the city's lights mocking me. Clara's touch lingered, but so did Elise's smile, a reminder that love wasn't enough. Not yet. I lay awake, wondering if I was fighting for a dream or a disaster. The next day, Clara texted me to meet her at the Venetian, where gondolas glided through artificial canals. I found her by the water, her eyes red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept. "I told Elise I need space," she said, her voice raw. "She's giving me a week to figure this out." A week. 7 days to decide our forever. I wanted to be angry. At Elise, at Clara, at myself, but all I felt was desperation. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "You," she said simply. "Just you." We rented a gondola. The gondoliers sang a soft backdrop as we drifted. Clara leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, the world was perfect. I told her about my life since Chicago, freelancing, traveling, running from her memory. She told me about her struggles, her art, the way Elise had been her anchor, but never her spark. "I don't want to hurt her," Clara said, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to lose you again." "Then don't," I said, my hand finding hers. "We can figure this out. Together." She nodded, tears falling, and I wiped them away, my thumb lingering on her cheek. The gondola rocked gently, the water reflecting the lights above, and I kissed her. It was soft, tentative, but it felt like coming home. She kissed me back, her hands in my hair, and for those few seconds, nothing else existed. But reality crept in. We stepped off the gondola, the weight of her choice settling between us. "I need to see Elise tonight," she said. "To be fair to her." I nodded, my throat tight. "I'll be here," I said. "Whatever you decide." That night, I wandered the strip, the city's chaos a mirror to my own. I ended up at a bar, nursing a whiskey, my camera capturing the blur of strangers. Every face reminded me of Clara, every light a reminder of her glow. I wondered if she was with Elise now, if she was slipping away again. My phone buzzed, a photo from Clara, a sketch of us on the gondola, her handwriting scrawled across it. "I'm trying." I stared at it, my heart aching with hope and fear. She was fighting for us, but was it enough? I downed my drink and walked back to my hotel, the city's pulse a reminder that time was slipping away. The next morning, Clara called me to a rooftop bar downtown, the city sprawling below like a map of our past. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed but determined. "I broke it off with Elise," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I told her I can't marry her." I stared, my heart pounding. "Clara." "I choose you," she said, stepping closer. "I choose us." I pulled her into my arms, the city blurring around us. We kissed, fierce and desperate, like we were making up for every lost moment. But even as I held her, doubt gnawed at me. Was this real? Or was it Vegas, weaving its spell of fleeting dreams? We spent the day together, exploring the city like tourists, laughing at cheesy magic shows, sharing cotton candy at a carnival pop-up, stealing kisses in hidden corners. But as night fell, Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Elise. "Can we talk? Please." Clara's face fell, and I knew this wasn't over. "Go," I said, my voice tight. "You owe her that." She nodded, squeezing my hand before leaving. I watched her go, the city's lights swallowing her, and I felt like I was losing her all over again. I spent the night in my hotel, staring at the photos I'd taken of her, each one a piece of the woman I loved. The next morning, Clara showed up at my door, her eyes bright with tears. "Elise is leaving Vegas," she said. "She's letting me go." I pulled her inside, and we sat on the bed, her head on my chest. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if we mess this up again?" "Then we'll fix it," I said, my voice fierce. "We're not perfect, but we're real." She smiled, and for the first time, it felt like we had a chance. We talked until dawn, planning a future, her art, my photography, a life where we didn't run from each other. As the sun rose over Vegas, I knew this was just the beginning, but it was ours. A month later, Clara and I stood in her studio, surrounded by her paintings and my photos, our lives tangled together again. We weren't perfect. There were fights, doubts, moments when the past crept in, but we were trying, and that was enough. We decided to stay in Vegas, to build something new in the city that brought us back together. Clara's art was gaining traction, her desert series selling out at a local gallery. I'd landed a contract with a magazine, my photos of the city capturing its heart in a way I'd never managed before. One evening, we walked to the Bellagio fountains, the place where this all began. The water danced, the music swelling, and Clara took my hand. "I'm glad I found you again," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Me too," I said, pulling her close. "No more running." We kissed under the fountain's mist, the city's lights a halo around us. It wasn't a fairy tale, love never is, but it was ours, hard-won and real. We'd faced our fears, our past, and come out stronger. Vegas, with all its chaos, had given us a second chance, and we weren't letting go. As we walked back to the studio, Clara's sketchbook tucked under her arm, my camera around my neck, I realized this was what love looked like, not perfect, not safe, but alive. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to live it.